I got a story for you in the NBA, all right? Sean Marks, the general manager of the Nets, is a native New Zealander. He was asked by a New Zealand paper if Kevin Durant might return to the Nets if, they finish the season and go to the playoffs. And Mark said, let me get this quote right. That's a $110 million question. We're never going to push him to get back, but I'll tell you this. Before the pandemic, he looked like Kevin Durant, unquote. I'll ask you, Wilbon, should the Nets push Kevin Durant to come back?
No, they shouldn't. They shouldn't push him to come back. And the only way I'd let him come back, he'd have to wow me in such a way, and he'd have to insist. He'd have to be at my door knocking on it, saying, put me in, coach, I'm ready to play. I wouldn't do it, Tony. The New York Nets, I know you wish they were. That's going back to your days on Long Island. Tony, the Brooklyn Nets are not going to win anything this year, even if they come back with a shortened playoff format, even if they come back 3 out of 5 all the way. They're not winning now. And so you got this big investment in Kevin Durant. Just give him till whenever they come back for real. He could go through a normal camp that's pushed 2 months later, perhaps, a season that starts in December. All these things would work in favor of him having suffered that injury. So given the risk and the possible reward, there ain't that much reward because the Nets ain't winning now. I would almost force him to wait.
All right, I'm going to go the other way on this one. I'm not going to say they should push him. I'm going to say they should ask him. They've got in payroll, $300 million between him and Kyrie Irving. If they start the playoffs right now, the Nets are 7th, which means I think they would play Toronto. I think if Kyrie Irving and Kevin Durant are ready to play, I think they can win the East. I don't know about Kyrie Irving. These are unhappy people. These are moody people. These are temperamental people. But if you tell me, Mike, that both of them can play, not just one, because with just one, even Durant, they're not going to win, you're right. But if both of them can play, I'm going to ask that question. If they say no, I'm going to live with it, but I'm going to ask that question because if we push to August or September, that's almost like next season.
I know, Tony, but he'd have to initiate it for me. Kevin Durant and his people would have to initiate it and then insist and insist and insist some more. I'm just going to say this as much as I love Kevin Durant as a player. Tony, I don't see Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving making the Nets a threat next season. I just don't. This injury is too hard to come back from, and Kyrie's injured all the time. It's too hard to come back from. I don't see them being a serious threat in the East, bigger than healthy Toronto. I don't know when Philly is going to get themselves together or if they will, or Milwaukee. So I don't particularly, Boston, I don't particularly see that. He'd have to knock down my door if I'm Sean Marks before I say yes. That's just me. Tony, this next story comes from the moon. A former Expos groundskeeper tells the Montreal Gazette that Pete Rose, yes, regularly had his bat corked, bats, I'm talking about plural, corked, while playing for the Expos in 1984. The groundskeeper quotes another Expos employee as saying Rose corked his bats for 20 years and nobody checked them because he was a singles hitter. Tone, seriously now, would you look at Pete Rose's career any differently if you found out there was truth in this, that he corked his bats?
Okay, so I think Pete Rose did more damage to himself maybe than any player ever when he bet on games as a manager. To me, that is worse than steroids. That is worse than banging on a garbage can because what it means is if you're not betting that day, you don't really have to care about winning. I would still put Pete Rose in the Hall of Fame, and now I would just add another line of type so that the plaque would be the longest in all of Cooperstown with all of Pete Rose's misdeeds. And the other thing that I would say about this, because I know you're going to say this, is that corking a bat, if you do it stupidly like Sammy Sosa and explodes all over the infield, that's different. But if you cork your bat, that's sort of within the parameters of acceptable cheating. We can catch you at that, and then you won't do that again. To me, all those hits, what's the number here? 4,257 or something? No, that was Ty Cobb. No, it's like 4,256. corking a bat doesn't get you all those hits. It just doesn't. He was one of the greatest hitters of all time. So,
but he was. But you know what, Tony? For me, it's not just the corking of the bats. It's the tipping point. How far can you go with Pete Rose? I mean, seriously, if this is true, corking is, first of all, the one thing I find it difficult to believe, one reason, is because this can't stay a secret for 20 years. We know clubhouses. You know how they operate. These guys are not just going to stay silent, whoever helped him cork his bats. This is 40 years later, Tony. I just have a hard time seeing it.
You don't believe it because the guy who allegedly corked the bat, this was his comment, I'm not at liberty to discuss it. That doesn't sound like a big-time denial to me. I'm not at liberty to discuss it.
But if it was true, as I ask you, if it could be the tipping point, because it does help you. Right. Because balls that might be flagged down and backhanded by a first baseman is through the gap between first and second, and that's another hit for Pete Rose. It's just unthinkable. Pete Rose stories at this point, Tony, I just started laughing when I heard this.
Okay, I mean, Charlie Hustle, right? He's the prototype ball player, take every advantage he possibly could. I don't disbelieve it. I guess you do.
I'm just saying I have a little, I'm a little skeptical.
Thanks for watching ESPN on YouTube. For live streaming sports and premium content, subscribe to ESPN+.